Hi guys, it's Mathew Blades. Thank you for having us on and making Learn from People Who Lived It a part of your podcast downloads. Before we get to today's episode with Summer Silva, I want to do a really good job, start to do a good job of highlighting some of the episodes we've had in the past, because there's been so many incredible stories. I mean, we're more than 100 deep into this thing, and there's two that I want to highlight today. First and foremost, a good friend of mine, Gabe. Now, Gabe was on the show sharing a story about being a quadriplegic. And at one point in the podcast, Troy DeSmet asks him this question.
Gabe, how do you experience freedom in your life?
Freedom for me is definitely my wheelchair. A lot of people, when they see somebody in a wheelchair, they think, oh, you're confined to a wheelchair or you can't do anything with it. Literally, it's a device for freedom for people with disabilities. Without this chair, I'd be stuck in bed or stuck in a chair at home doing nothing.
He is such an absolute inspiration and such a light. Go have a listen to Series 2, Episode 6. He's so good. There's parts 1 and 2 with Gabe. Now, the episode we released right after that was a friend of mine, Brandy. Brandy was on our show because of an auto accident in which 6 people had to come together to save her life. But earlier than that, she dealt with a pregnancy and an unwanted abortion. Listen to this.
I did get pregnant on the birth control pill, and I thought, oh, there's this like 1% chance. I fell in that category. So I'm going to fall in the category of this 1% chance that abortion isn't going to work. So as I was being put under for the procedure, I was praying to God that it wouldn't work and that I could, if it didn't work, then it was meant to be. And everybody that kind of said that I should have this, that I would prove to them, well, I tried. And that was kind of my first glimpse into you don't gamble with God.
Every story is just so incredible, so hopeful, so inspirational, and such an opportunity to learn from people who lived it. Okay, let's jump off into today's episode with Summer right now.
Looking for no bullshit conversation about mental health? Find Learn from People Who Lived It wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from People Who Lived It.
Welcome to another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It.
Summer, and I'm 44.
Hi, Summer. What story are you here to share today?
Just a brief summary of my life and life experience.
Who do you hope hears this?
Anyone at any age that can relate to struggle and perseverance and finding who they are and what their purpose and abilities are to help others in small ways.
I like that. Well, welcome to another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It. I am Mathew. That is Summer. And down in the bottom there is the smartest man in probably all of Arizona, Dr. Frank Bavacqua. How are you, man?
I'm doing pretty good. You got me blushing already.
Man, listen, I'm glad to have you back. Summer's going to have just a dynamite conversation with us today about, as you heard, some of her struggles. And, you know, it's interesting because she said the P word in there. And I wonder, you know, all of us work with that word, that purpose word, you know, as we get a little bit older and we try to figure out what is that all about? And what am I supposed to step into? And where are you on purpose, Dr. Frank?
I'm going to say somewhere right in the middle, which I'm going to tell myself is exactly where I need to be. Because you're right. Like when we're young, we think a lot of things are important that aren't necessarily important. And hopefully by the end of our life, we've kind of figured out what our purpose is and what we're leaving behind and what we're passing on to others. And all the messy stuff in the middle is where we kind of figure some of that stuff out. And I'm going to say I'm roughly halfway through.
All right, that's fair. Here's a question for all three of us before we jump right off and into the deep end. It's like, at what age do you think the average person starts to think about purpose? I'll go to you first, Summer. Like, at what age do you think we are where for the first time people are going, what am I here to do?
I'd say for women, it may be a little bit earlier than men, but I don't know. And I'd say women late 30s, early 40s, men maybe early 40s.
Yeah, I actually don't think that she's too far off. I was going to give women, actually, like you did, a little bit of an earlier nod. I was going to say in their late 20s, and that's only based on the fact that that's the average age in which a woman starts to have a family and bears a child. And like, if you ask me, that has to change your whole world. And so I would think that purpose word would jump in there. And then I was going to say for men, probably early 30s. They start to ask that question. What about you, Dr. Frank?
Maybe I'm on the lower end. I was going to say 30, and I think for me, 30 was that first birthday where I couldn't quite convince myself I was still a kid. I mean, if I'm being real honest.
Yeah, right.
If I'm being real honest, okay, I'm about to be 39, and in a lot of ways I still feel like a kid. But I think as soon as I hit 30, that's when I really started asking myself, career especially at that point, I was like, is this what I want to do forever? Do I want to try something? Now's the kind of the time to go do that. And I really started thinking more intentionally, kind of future oriented. So I'm going to say 30.
Wow. All right. Well, listen, we have so many things to get into today, including, as you heard just a few minutes ago, Summer's desire to kind of share her story and share her journey with us. And well, there's all kinds of buzzwords in your stories. You wrote to us about, what you've endured over life. You see words like heroin, you see words like death, you see words like bullying, you see words like cancer. You've certainly had tons thrown your way, Summer. And so on this particular podcast, we love to start with the first 10 years of people's lives. Just think that gives us a real good snap at, how things started. So 0 to 10, what's the Summer story?
Well, I was born in 78 and lived at the time with both of my parents until about the age of 2. That's when my first real memory of, I guess, them separating. My mom had decided she wanted to go get us ice cream and didn't come home. And that's where the heroin addiction comes in. She was addicted to heroin. And early on, there was some turbulence and things that went on that ended up with me being with her for a short time after, probably from 3 to about 4.5, 5. And then my dad ended up getting me and my brother after that time period. So we lived with my father and his parents, my 2 grandparents. With that being said, my mom was in and out of our lives. She was homeless at times, which sometimes she would come get me or my brother, mostly me, and take me to strange places to score drugs, heroin, houses that were scary, or leave me in the car while she goes into South Phoenix and gets her fix, and on the floorboard is needles and, 6-year-old little girl not knowing really what's going on, or at that time, of course, you think everything's normal. So that was kind of my early time period. She had a boyfriend in there that was very abusive. So I saw a lot of that. I saw just a lot of things that little girls are not really supposed to be seeing, sexually, drug-wise, people that are scary. My mom did prison time. Things like that. That's kind of my early stages. But on the flip side of that, very grateful that I had my grandparents' influence, because I feel like they were the grounding that I needed, that taught me my moral compass and the ability to navigate all the rest of the things that I've dealt with over the years. Yeah, so that's.
Can I pause you really quick? Sure. Because I'd love to bring you in, Dr. Frank, and talk about some of these things. You and I are on the same page. 0 to 10 is the most important decade of any of our lives. And when you experience some of the stuff that she experienced from a psychological standpoint, you and I both know that that stuff's going to show up for the rest of her life unless she leans into working on it and, using tools and all of the things. So can you help us really quick, man, from the psychological standpoint, because you are the psychologist on the show? Can you help us understand what's going to happen to somebody when, like, mom's not around, dad's not around, there's exposure to sex too early? And I know I'm asking for a ton right now, man, but take your time. Please take your time and help us understand how that's going to show up for somebody later.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked so many times and we've had so many guests where they've described, early childhood experiences that maybe some of them are extreme and maybe some of them not quite as extreme. And I think we've all had some experiences where we don't realize that something is, let's say, not common or not normal, or something is amiss. And we don't really realize that until we're maybe exposed to other people, other families, other things later on. And then we can kind of compare our family to that family and be like, that's not how our family worked. And then there's some of the experiences like Summer was just talking about, that I have a hunch, Summer, even at the time, you knew something felt a little weird or off, or this is probably not where a kid is supposed to be. So I'm just going to am I right? Like, did you kind of know at the time that stuff felt weird, or wasn't it until later that you look back and you're like, wow, that was very different than other kids?
Well, I mean, there's definitely circumstances at the time, like, watching my mom and trying, like, I'm a 5-year-old and she's getting beat by her boyfriend, like getting in between and yelling at him, like, don't hurt my mom. You have
Right.
your natural instincts that kick in of protection to your parents. So,
right. And you knew at that time, like, that's not something that's supposed to be happening. Right.
Right.
That even early on, that your mom is not supposed to, like, leave and not return when she says she's going to return.
Right.
You're not supposed to be exposed to and see certain things. Right. And so it changes the way our personalities, our brains, the way we cope with some of that stuff. And my hunch is you develop some coping mechanisms early on, and maybe they were effective and appropriate at the time. And sometimes when we carry those coping mechanisms later into life, they're not necessarily appropriate anymore. Because really what we're talking about trauma on different levels. We're talking about traumatic experiences, and we're not really made to, we're made to, like, survive traumatic experiences, but we're not made to, like, experience them regularly. And so when we develop some of those coping mechanisms for those things, if we carry them later on when they're no longer relevant, that's when you see a lot of people just get stuck in these patterns that they can't break out of. So let me kind of segue into a question. Did you notice as you got older, even into teenage years, did you notice some of those coping mechanisms still go into play? Like, did you lean into drugs because instead of rejecting it, you kind of, like, leaned into it and accepted it because that made it easier to kind of understand who your mom was?
Yeah, at a very early age I did, and through high school. But I think what kept me I never went off the deep end. Number one, I think the influence of my mom taught me that I never want to be like her in a way. And then the other side of it is my grandparents. And even though my dad lived with us, he was a very loving man, and we had a very loving connection. And I don't want to say too much about people's faults, but I just think having the structure that I had that my grandparents provided helped keep me on a more straight and narrow path versus completely going off the deep end. Now, there were time periods where I was doing things I definitely shouldn't have been doing as well.
Yeah.
But
And Matthew, I think like that's another common theme that we continue to see, is that folks who, we'll call it kind of coming out on the other end, they had at least one or more positive, even though there was terrible stuff happening, they had one or more sort of positive influences somewhere early on, that gave you kind of an alternative perspective on how things maybe could be, instead of what, only seeing what you were seeing right in front of you. And it sounds like your grandparents were exactly, they saved you probably in a lot of ways.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's incredible. And thank you for the explanation. I just, when you talk about legacy and purpose, if I leave any kind of legacy or purpose behind, it's what we just talked about. It's to help people understand that the way that they grow up and the things that they experience have the largest impact on the way that they're thinking, acting, and operating as adults, unless they learn how to overcome some of those things. And Summer, here's the question for you. So given all that, Frank's big explanation, what I just said about, those things will really control you later in life, can you think of ways that some of that crap from your childhood has shown up in your adult world?
Yeah. Childhood was that way. And then my teen years, I had some really rough patches through high school. When it came to, I'll just tell the quick story if you want.
Please.
My first sexual experience was a date rape, and I was in middle school. I was in 8th grade, and he was 17. And the word got out on the street that we had that experience, and he supposedly had AIDS. So I spent 4 years of high school with being like, I'd show up on my first hour period and there'd be a pamphlet on my desk about AIDS. When I turned 16, somehow found some kind of nonprofit that helped me get tested. And I, of course, don't have it. And that was all rumors in high school, and you know how that goes. But it had a pretty big impact on me. And there was always something that kept me going. And I feel like it was strength. It was just like inner determination and strength of getting through, like will, maybe like a strong will to be more than that. Although I think my self-worth was like non-existent after that for a long time. And I think I'm still trying to gain my self-worth back. But with that being said, the early childhood, my high school experiences, I got married. You were leading into that a little while ago, and got married when I was like 25 and had my first son, my only son, when I was 28. And at 5 weeks old, he was diagnosed with a stage 3 cancer. And I say that with saying that I don't feel like I could have gotten through what I went through with my son if I didn't experience all those things prior that built on my strength. Like I just, and maybe that's survival mode at that time and your body just kicks in. And, I remember during that time period when my son was diagnosed and like the worst day of my life. And I hope it's always the worst day of my life. People would always say, you're so strong. But like, what choice do you have? Like, what are you going to do when your son's, you have to sign a dotted line to give your 5-week-old newborn chemotherapy? Like, what are you going to do? Say no? So I feel like strength shows up in a lot of ways, but then there's also your natural instinctual fight or flight that I feel like I'm fighting. My son is not going to die. I'm going to do everything in my power to keep this boy on this planet. I was first pregnancy, only child, like that's my mission. And it was for I think the first year I didn't leave the house. We would barely just walk in his stroller around the block, and I didn't want people to see him. I would have, if family came over, I'd make him like sanitize our hands, and because he was going through treatment. He went through 24 weeks of chemotherapy and stage 3 neuroblastoma. And for years we would go I think for the first year is like once every 3 months. Maybe that was the second year. Then every 6 months. And then he still goes once a year. He's 16 now, and we still go. And oddly enough, my mom is in the same hospital right now where he was diagnosed. So I'm going to visit her, and those same feelings come about as I'm walking down those halls. And I actually took my son there to see her on Mother's Day. And there's a whole train section outside where the kids can go out, or at that time it's changed now, but at that time where kids could go out and like experience, kid stuff. And I asked my son, do you remember that? Because he was around the hospital up until age 3, 4-ish a lot. And he said he did. And I thought, gosh, that was interesting, because he was so young, but like that little, train area, it's huge, like imprinted in his brain, anyway.
Well, it represented, something fun in the midst of all the other stuff. I mean, it makes perfect sense that it stood out. And the other thing that stood out to me was, we served up this expression from time to time on this podcast, Dr. Frank, which is, it didn't happen to you, it happened for you. And I kind of felt a little bit of that as she was explaining her story there with her son. You even said it. You said all that stuff that I went through, like, allowed me to move through this next experience in some way, shape, or form. Speak to that a little bit, Dr. Frank, from your perspective. And then I'd actually really love to hear what you think about that statement too, Summer. But Frank, what do you got?
Yeah, I mean, we do use that phrase a lot. And the other phrase that kind of came to mind is, and I don't necessarily always agree with it, like the whole, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. And honestly, that's not always the case. There's kind of a line there, right? There's ways that we get tested that can strengthen us. And then there's sometimes that we get tested just beyond what we're able to handle. And it can break us. The analogy that I'm thinking, like lifting weights in the gym, right? When you lift weights, like you do temporarily get weaker, right? That's how muscles grow. You break them down and then they grow. But if you push yourself too hard, if you injure yourself, if you don't allow yourself to kind of, rest and recover, you wind up doing more damage than good, right? So there needs to be a line. Not every test strengthens us. And so, Summer, you described this, I think fair to say, kind of tumultuous childhood upbringing, early years, and then you're thrown this huge test. You said 28 was when your son was born. Where in, like, we know you were tested early on, but where do you think that strength came from? Like, how did you learn to overcome some of those things as opposed to just be broken down by them? Because there are some people who would have been faced with that exact same test at 28 and just crumbled and not known what to do and not been able to move forward and not have that kind of fighting spirit. Like you said, like, there's no way I'm letting this happen. You had that, you developed that, you learned that from somewhere. Where do you think it, like, what do you point to? Where did it come from?
I knew.
So happy you asked this question. Thank you.
I knew I wanted to be the opposite of my mom. So
Okay.
I knew, number one, I had that like shining light and as my forefront, like, I'm going to be the best mom I can be. So I got to, like, that was always there. My grandfather, he was one of the best human beings I've never heard him speak badly about anyone. He was just so grounded and so centered and so loving and kind. And I feel like maybe I never wanted to disappoint him. I don't know. I can't really put an exact finger on it. A lot of it, I think, comes from will, like I mentioned before. But I also had periods of time where I would drink. I'd go out and party with my friends, and that was a release for me. All through my 20s, after my son was sick and he was better, like I did it again. I would go out with my friends and, stay out. And, that was live music. Luckily, my dad was a musician, and I, as a child, when I was with him, I would be at his shows, and music became a huge, huge part of my life then. Like I think when you talked about coping mechanisms as a child, music was one of them. For me, all through high school, music was, and still, like when I need some time, like I need a break, music's it. I'm going to a live show, live music. I'm dancing. I love to dance. I was that little girl out on the dance floor that was like 8 years old, and everyone else was adults, so some of great memories I have also from childhood like that, even though maybe shouldn't have been at a bar at 8 years old, or, I try to look at some of like the good things that came from those experiences, and I don't know what I would do without music.
Yeah.
Like hands down.
Well, isn't it so true? And I love what Tony Robbins says, is like, you can't just talk about all the crappy stuff. Like there had to have been some good things in there too. And, the neat thing about crappy things is they sort of show us what we don't like. And so there still in lies a little bit of an education there. I would like to kind of make the second half of this podcast a little bit about what we're into right now, which is I want to tap into your resiliency. You clearly have some either innate sense or something. I think that's what Frank's getting at, right? Like there's something inside of you that isn't in other people. And our job, I think, is to kind of get you to articulate that a little bit so other people can tap into that themselves. Do you feel like you want to ask something, Frank? I see you kind of leaning in a little bit, because if not, I'll give her a chance to just sort of serve that up.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question, and if we can kind of uncover that answer together, I think that can help a lot of people, because I think some people will look at, outside looking in and think that, well, some people have that and some people don't, and I'm one of the people who I don't have that. I don't have that fighting spirit. I don't have that perseverance. Some people are able to be more resilient, whatever, and almost everything is a skill that can be learned. Can I point to an exact moment, where I learned perseverance? Not necessarily. I think being involved in sports early on probably helped with that. Being competitive, not liking to lose, handling losing, but not liking to lose, and just that mentality of I'm going to keep showing up every day and quitting, or losing isn't necessarily just the other team scoring more than you. Losing is when you quit, right? That's what losing is. And I learned that somewhere on, and I've carried that into, career and relationship and those kind of things later on. So I have an idea of kind of where mine came from, I think. Summer, where do you have an idea of where yours came from?
Well, I do have 3 older brothers.
That'll do it.
So, there were my brothers and his friends that would come over, and there was a lot of, I guess, competitiveness there, but a lot of teasing and a lot of me, like, it made me stronger.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, I still tease them if I run into them,
Mm-hmm.
how bad they tortured me. But it builds something within you when you have
Mm-hmm.
those kinds of experiences. So maybe that's part of it. I really can't put a total finger on it. And maybe you guys can help pull that out of me somehow. But one thing that I will mention that I always have tried to focus on is the things that I'm grateful for. So when that happened with my son, music was such a big thing. My dad's a musician. My brothers are musicians. We had friends that owned a bar here in Tempe at the time, and they did a benefit concert to raise money for us because I was working up until the day I was due to have him, and I had to stop to care for him. So we were actually on Channel 3 News at the time. And these are the things that make me like realize that there is humanity, because there are days that I question humanity at times, you know, when we have really bad days and there's some jerk being this way or that way. But I would get envelopes in the mail from complete strangers, you know, $50, $100, you know, they raised like, I want to say like $35,000 for us that night. And there was a second benefit that was done that my dad was a part of too. But the community came together. I mean, people would come up to me and hug me at the benefit, and just, you know, all they wanted to do was pour love into my child and give me strength. And I remember I would type emails of like updates about him, because it was like MySpace time. It was before Facebook,
right,
Instagram and all that. And I would type, you know, okay, this is what Jameson's going through, and this is what his counts are like. And, you know, he was supposed to only have 12 weeks of chemo, but he ended up having to have 12 more because his tumor was so involved in arteries in his neck that they were afraid to do surgery, and, you know, all these updates. And, you know, what kept me going is when I would check my email the next day, and I would have support in there from people that, you know, there's a lot of people, it's community. And during my childhood and through high school, friendships, I don't know what I would have done without my friends and the experiences that we had that were beautiful. You know, I mean, I spent so much time out on the lake in the summers, senior ditch days. We would go out to the lake and cliff jump, and, you know, so we had the Salt River, you know, so there's all these little bits and pieces of beauty that we have to pay attention to. And for me, if you can look for what the things that you're grateful for every day, then it keeps that as your focus versus how terrible certain things can be. And don't get me wrong, I have days where I'm like, you know what? I don't want to cuss right now, but
fuck it. Right, I get it. I get it.
Fucking do this anymore.
Right.
Enough of the struggle, enough of the bullshit, enough of anything and everything that life can throw at you. I'm done with the struggles. There are days like that. But then I lean on my husband, he's my second husband. Unfortunately, my first marriage, my son's father and I didn't work out. We luckily are at a point now, just recently within the last month, where we're back to having a really good place, and we're friends, which is huge for my son. And, you know, having community, having friendships, having family, if you have them. If you don't have family, then rely on friends, because that's how I did. I lost my grandfather, who was the most important person in my life at that time when I was 13, in the midst of all that. So if you like, I would just lean into community in whichever way I could in each circumstance, you know, as it was thrown at me in life. And I still do. Like, I recently had a situation with my son, and I reached out to you, and I reached out to people that just pop in your brain when you're like, okay, who's the best person that can help me navigate this better, or just be a supporter, or someone to like bounce ideas off of, or just go and sit and have a nice dinner and connect with someone. Like, so much of that for me makes each week, each month, each year meaningful.
Well, I can tell you, you're the polar opposite of what you experienced growing up. What I witnessed with you after our time together is nothing short of like pure love, and what do they call it? Unconditional love, right? You reaching out to me about the situation that you were in. It was clear as hell to me that I was on the phone with somebody who would do anything for her son, anything. And that's how can you not be moved by that? And so number one, I feel like, you're kicking ass in that space. So if that was one of your goals in life to do something different and be a different kind of a mom, well, then you did that for sure. You're absolutely on that train. And then the other thing I'm going to say to you both is, Frank, I don't think it's that difficult to figure out where this resiliency is. I think it's really as straightforward and as simple as she uses her tools. When she gets to a point where she's like maxed out, she talks about community, friendships, concerts, music. Like she just knows what she needs and she gives it to herself. Isn't that kind of what you heard too?
Yeah. I mean, that was one of the gratitude, which you said over and over again, and community. And yeah, there are a lot of people who don't know what they need, or they lean into the wrong things, maybe unhealthy things. But having that, we've all heard that attitude of gratitude, right? And that doesn't mean that we like pretend that the bad stuff doesn't exist. It's just that we take a second to remind ourselves that even though bad stuff exists, there might also be something that's not bad, that's in existence at the same time. And that community thing too, right? This idea that there are some times where crap goes so wrong that it feels like, we kind of lose our faith in humanity, or everyone or everything is against us, and to remind ourselves that there are people that are on our side, and that we can lean on. That's probably another huge common theme that we continue to see with folks is virtually no one kind of gets to where they are, if that place is a good place, completely by themselves, right? They need people along the way to ground them, to help them, to lean on. There are
but hold on, can I just interrupt you really quick? But say, and then also though, Summer, good on you. You have to choose it.
Yeah.
You have to elect into it. Like we all have friends. We all have concerts we could go to. But some of us, when we're in the shit, we don't choose that for ourselves. And, you talked about some of the bullying that you had earlier on where you were working through some self-esteem issues, but girl, you love yourself enough to give yourself what you need in these moments. And that to me is worth gratitude. That's worth celebrating. That to me is so worth pointing out to others. Like, it's not enough that it's available to you. You actually have to choose it too. So, okay, back to you, Summer. Where is this coming from?
Oh, well, it led me to your self-care class. I mean, I know that we have a breaking point, and there have been times in recent years where I'm just like throwing in the towel, but then I realize I'm a mama. Like, I can't do that. I got to be here. I got to be here for my son. I have stepchildren. I have my husband. I have people that also rely on me too, and I can't be, like you say, the best version of myself unless I'm taking care of myself. And that's happened more recently. I've recently gone back to college. I'm graduating on the 24th of June with my bachelor's.
Yeah.
At 44. So it's never too late for anyone here that feels like, they're 20 or 25 or 30 or 50 or 70. Like, I went back. I have a 4.0 GPA. I'm like going to toot my horn here for a minute.
Toot.
And I go to a university called Maharishi International University, and it's conscious-based education, and they require you to do transcendental meditation in order to even attend the university. And a lot of the papers that you write are based on your experience from TM, what it's done to your life, things like that. And I can tell you that without TM, I wouldn't have a 4.0 because the last time I went to college was when I was 19. So, and tools, that's another tool for me. I don't even have to pull it out of my pocket. It's right there. And that's been life-changing. Having a partner, I will say this is probably one of the most important things that anyone can do, I believe, is choosing the right partner. Don't choose just based on looks and sex and all those things, because having a partner that will say to you, like, I can tell you're burnt out. We need to go on a trip this weekend for the night. Huge. They can put themselves aside for that minute and just recognize, like, my wife needs something that she's not getting right now. And I know, and same for me with him. Support, communication, there's so many things about a relationship that are so much more important than the physical, which is great. But I give my husband, I can say besides my grandfather that my husband has shown more love and compassion and support to me than anyone ever in my life. And I'm incredibly grateful for having him by my side. We've been together almost 10 years in August. So choose someone good. Don't jump right in. Don't get married young because you want to have kids. Make a good choice. Take your time. Get to know them. That for me is something that I wish I would have known when I was much younger with any relationship that I have. And not that I didn't have good ones, because I had some really great men in my life before my husband. But it's huge.
I'm going to bring in Frank, and I'm going to ask the doctor to get vulnerable on our podcast, if he will. But you are somebody who did wait a little later in life until you got married, which, by the way,
calling me old?
I am calling you mature. And he just got hooked up. We just had the big ceremony, and he's just back from his honeymoon. I mean, this is all fresh, 90 days, right?
Yeah.
And so I wonder if you would be vulnerable a little bit, Frank, and just talk about how hard it was to be patient sometimes until you found Michelle.
Yes and no in terms of the question of, was it hard to be patient? I was somebody who, I think early on, early in life, saw pretty clear differences between, at least on the outside, what looked like happy marriages and unhappy marriages. And I kind of vowed to myself really early on that I was not going to settle for an unhappy, right? I would be single forever if it meant not having to be, trapped in an unhappy situation. And there were good people that came along, but that weren't right. It wasn't the right fit. And even though it was good for a little while, I could tell that it wasn't going to be great long term. And I did not want that. It's fun. When Michelle and I met each other, we were both of the mindset that neither one of us really minded being single. We were kind of okay with it. And we were each only going to ever involve ourselves with someone else if that someone else came along and made our life better than single life was. And luckily, we found that in each other. I have every reason to believe that this is going to be great for 50 years. I imagine a lot of people think that 2.5 months after they get married. But every indication is that the wait was well worth it.
Yeah. Good for you both. Good for you both, man. Is there anything, Summer, that we've left off the table that you were hoping to put on the table before we wrap up?
You know, learn from mistakes. I think that was huge for me. Don't keep making the same mistakes. Learn from them, and that'll be helpful in any stage of life. Rely on people, rely on community, rely on friendships. Do the things you love as often as you can, because those are the things that are going to keep you going. I will say just one thing. I'm incredibly grateful for the friendships that have been there from early on to now. Friendships that have come and gone. People that I have in my life that have supported my son and I near and far. And just happy that I am at a stage in life where hopefully what my story is can make a difference in someone else's life and give them the strength or the courage or the tenacity to make the choices that are going to bring them a beautiful life.
I wonder if you'll end with your philosophy about life, which you wrote to us is like a wave or an ocean. What do you mean when you say that?
Yeah, I feel like life is like waves or the ocean. You know, you're going to have some really big, heavy waves that hit you and they try to knock you down. And then you're going to have times where you're out further out and it's calm and you can enjoy it and you can look up at the sky and you can see and enjoy all the beauty. And you just have to be ready for those waves, and having the things there that support that in your life is what's going to help get you through.
Final thoughts from you, Dr. Frank?
You know, we talk so much about how do we take someone's experience and how do we translate that to other people so that they can kind of take something away and learn from it and step into it themselves. And I think the way to summarize how we get to good places, right? We need tools, right? And obviously we need to be able to step in and use them, choose to use them. And we need people. And I think we need to use those tools and rely on people. And I think we get a little bit backwards when we rely on tools and use people. But if we can have tools and use them appropriately and rely on people along the way, I think more often than not, we're going to end up in a pretty good place.
Summer, thank you so much for being on our podcast.
Thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it.
We have 3 goals with Learn from People Who Lived It. 1, to help you feel less alone. 2, encourage you to seek out a coach, a therapist, a church, anyone who can help you get through your journey and find some healing. 3, when you're ready, share your story with us.
Find Learn from People Who Lived It wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from People Who Lived It.